G'day, Dave here, and we're looking at James chapter 3. James has been speaking about the power of our words, how words can seem so insignificant, but they can do great damage or great good. You've heard the saying, sticks and stones may break your bones, but names will never hurt you. Couldn't be further from the truth. Names can do so much damage. And as we look back on early years of child development and see the bullying and the stress that children are under by the way that people have used their words against them, we can see something of that impact. You see the power of words at work in leaders of countries and the things that they say or they tweet. You see the power of words at work in teachers, at school, in parents with children, in church, from the preacher, from us as we gather together and we use words either for good, for building up, or for bad, for tearing down. And if we want to use words well, then we've seen the need for a heart change. It's not simply what comes out of the mouth that matters, it's what's flowing out of the heart. And if our hearts are going to change, then God needs to be at work within us, and we need God's wisdom. We need God to be working in us to produce wise people who will speak wise words. And if we're going to understand wisdom, we need to see wisdom the way that the Bible does. I mean, who do you know who's wise? Well, I know a fellow who had 3 PhDs. He was a doctor 3 times over, a professor. I have another friend who's a professor who has won just about every science prize, short of the Nobel Prize in his field. I have one particular friend who trained first as a lawyer and then worked as a lawyer, then as a doctor, and now works as a doctor. I mean, are these the wise people, those who've been to university, those who've got the degrees, those who've led, their degrees have led them into particular professions where they're doing very well? Or is it the person who's had a lot of experience? By contrast, it might be the person who's spent a good deal of their life in jail. I know a fellow who's spent most of his adult life there, and he's certainly experienced things that I'll never experience. Does that make him wise? Or the parent who's raised 10, 12 children. I mean, surely there's a heap of life experience there. Is it life experience, whether it's family or business or travel, going around seeing the different cultures of this world? What is it that makes people wise? Or is it knowing how to navigate through a pandemic, knowing what to do in the face of the threat of COVID? Is it being able to provide good leadership amongst people who don't know what to do, who are dependent upon those who do? Well, friends, the Bible tells us that wisdom is not simply a high IQ. In fact, wisdom's not even a high EQ, as important as that is. Intelligence quotient and emotional quotient. And often our relationships with people and our leadership of people is a lot more a factor of our EQ than our IQ. But it's neither of these things alone. Now, wisdom, according to the Bible, has a different source and a different outcome. And I want you to look at James chapter 3 and verse 13 following with me. And we'll see there are 2 types of wisdom being contrasted. Verse 13, who is wise and understanding among you? Well, let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbour bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. Now there's one type of wisdom. It's a wisdom that doesn't come from heaven. It actually is earthly, it's unspiritual, it's even demonic. As we saw previously with the power of the tongue being set on fire by the fires of hell itself, there is a wisdom that comes from below. And it's earthly, it's unspiritual, and the devil loves it. By contrast, verse 17, but the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Now there's a contrast here, notice, between 2 types of wisdom. And we can see the difference in 2 ways. First of all, where the wisdom comes from. There is a wisdom that is earthly, unspiritual, demonic, and it leads to all kinds of earthly outcomes. There's a wisdom from above, a wisdom that comes from heaven, a wisdom from God himself that brings about real transformation and change. And it's helpful, I think, for us to see wisdom by its fruit. You see, the wisdom that is simply earthly and unspiritual, what is its fruit? Well, take a look here. It harbours bitter envy and selfish ambition, verse 14. You see it in verse 16, envy, selfish ambition, disorder, and every evil practice. See, there's an earthly ambition. There's something which is unspiritual, that's fundamentally selfish, that destroys relationships with others, that's proud, it's arrogant, it wants what others have got, it puts itself first. By contrast, there's a wisdom from heaven. And see what we have in this wisdom. It leads, instead of to selfish outcomes, it leads to putting others before ourselves. Verse 17, the wisdom from heaven is first of all pure. It's full of mercy, good fruit. It's impartial. It doesn't show favoritism. It's sincere. It's not hypocritical. It's got to do with making peace rather than destroying peace. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. See, what we see in these verses, it's consistent with the way James has been talking all the way along. See, back in chapter 1, he talked about having a genuine Christian religion, a genuine Christian piety, living out our Christian faith in a way that's real. And he says back in chapter 1 and verse 17, those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. You see, genuine Christian faith leads to changed speech, it leads to changed action. It leads to turning inside out, not concerned with me and my needs, but putting others before myself. That's true religion. And we've seen also in chapter 2 where he talks about the nature of faith. That faith is not simply saying you believe in something that it exists. No, true faith is to put your trust in something. It's to depend upon it. It's to rely upon it. It's actually to give of yourself. It's to put your trust into action. And we saw those examples of Abraham and of Rahab, who were willing to trust God even at the threat to their own family, to their own lives. You see, real faith is shown in action. So it's no surprise when it comes to wisdom that true wisdom won't be measured by IQ or even EQ. True wisdom won't be measured by the amount of degrees you've got or the experiences that you've taken on board, how clever or strategic you are. No, true wisdom, a wisdom that comes from above, will flow out in living a life which is good, a life which is pure, humble, seeking to do good for the sake of others. See, James wants wisdom that's real, and real wisdom transforms the one who is wise, so that he is able to influence for good those around about him. True wisdom seeks others' welfare, not our own. True wisdom reaches out from heaven to us and from us to others, and it's real. It's fundamentally real because it's God-given. And it's given for the purpose of blessing our lives so that we might bless others. And you know what? As we bless others, so we receive the blessing. It goes around. What goes around, it comes around. God gives wisdom so that we might speak well, so that we might live well. And that means to be a blessing to other people. Let's pray for wisdom.